Welcome to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Teamwork's Player ID. In every episode, we bring you insights into the teams behind the teams in professional football. Coming up on today's episode.
The evolution we're going to see, over the next months, certainly in the next years, is a little bit of an evolution from what we internally call reactive to proactive, right? So much of that today is I still need you to go to the system and ask a question. I need you to say, hey, show me the 10 players that are most exciting for this role, or I need you to say, show me that load. I think with the agentic workflows that are coming online, that's going to evolve, right? We can know that the second that a player is injured and start recommending next steps for you, right? And so I think we're going to move from this world of people needing to query the system to the system being able to proactively suggest, recommendations and data that they may want to look like.
I'm Simon Austin from Training Ground Guru, and our guest on this episode is Reid Shaffner. Reid is the Chief Technology Officer at Teamworks and an expert on the application of AI in sport. He told me how AI is being deployed in football and about the risks and opportunities it presents. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please give us a follow via your preferred podcast provider. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, Reid.
Thank you very much for having me, Simon.
Could you start by telling us about your role at Teamworks, please, and what it involves?
So I am the Chief Technology Officer at Teamworks, which means that I oversee our engineering, design, product, and data science teams. So I get the pleasure of overseeing what we build, how we build it, and it's a lot of fun.
What was your route into that job? What were you doing before?
I've had a long and wandering career. I worked at Microsoft. I worked in gaming for a number of years, building things like Words with Friends and Farmville and Cityville, and then went to a company, Scopely, that now has Pokemon Go and a bunch of those games. Started a few companies that ultimately sold. The most recent one was a company called Mojo, which was in the youth sports space. So we were working on, interesting for this podcast, instructional content for youth and media capture in that world. We were acquired by TeamSnap, which is actually probably the largest youth sports coordination and registration platform in the United States. So I was the CTO there for a number of years, and that brought me here to Teamworks.
And I was reading, actually, I think on your LinkedIn, there's 30 million families use TeamSnap or have used it.
It's millions of users every month that log on there to coordinate their kids' schedules, now to capture their games and live stream them, and even starting to get into statting in the youth world, and obviously also consuming a lot of coaching content. So you have people on there getting training plans for hundreds of thousands of soccer games and practices every year.
So is artificial intelligence a major part of your role now at Teamworks?
Certainly, when we talk to our customers, right, AI is at the forefront of everyone's mind. And in my role, it's both how do we build software, how is that evolving? How do we design software, how is that evolving? And then, of course, arguably most important is how is it going to evolve the products that we put in hands of our customers?
I think we all hear a lot about AI in our day-to-day lives, and we hear about it a lot in professional football as well. So I was wondering if you could just give us a quick definition of what AI is exactly, because I think the term has been around since 1955, I heard you say.
I think there's a computer scientist in the United States, McCarthy, who's first credited with the phrase artificial intelligence, right? And so I think obviously, if we think back to really the last 3 to 5 years, it's when it entered the popular discourse, right? But long before that, there have been disciplines of AI, right? You've had machine learning, of course. You've had computer vision, which obviously is massively consumed in the sports world, and frankly foundational to a lot of the models that people are using out there. You have natural language processing, right? And then increasingly, you have the discipline of AI, and it has certainly become the most talked about, which is generative AI and these large language models and all of the agentic workflows that are taking place. But broadly, right, the field of AI encapsulates many different approaches.
And we also hear about large language models.
Your Claudes, your Chat GPTs, exactly. Yeah, right. So I think I think right now when most people think about AI, they do think about these, these large language models that are transformer based, right? That have come onto the scene. And frankly, they're being used for a lot of purposes. But yeah, exactly. Those are your Groks, your Claudes, your Chat GPTs, and all of the rest.
And they're operating on a predictive basis then, largely.
You may have heard people say that it's the old it's predicting the next thing, the next word, the next token in a given sequence, right? But it turns out that that can be used to predict a lot of things, whether that's what the next pixel is in an image or the next frame in a video. They are predictive models at the end of the day.
And how widely is AI being deployed in football at the moment?
I think you have certainly clubs have been using machine learning for a long time, right? In various models that are out there. Certainly, if we think about computer vision, right, we're seeing that used across the world of football. I think from an LLM perspective, I think you'll be hard pressed to find a club where there's not at least a few people in the club today in the world of football using LLMs and experimenting with it. We're seeing teams that are standing up their own lake houses and saying, "Hey, what can I do with AI directly on top of that?" And certainly, if you're on one of our products, there's an increasing amount of AI embedded into it. And so, at least from the customers that we're talking to, I think it's still at the very, it's in its infancy, right, in terms of adoption. But I think in terms of experimentation, at this point, I'm hard pressed to find a customer that isn't at least experimenting with AI.
Would you say that use is kind of mixed in its effectiveness?
The reality, at least that we find, is it's really good for some applications today, and others it's still a lot of work to get it to where you want. And I think the same is true in our football customers, where there's areas where it's frankly safe and easier to achieve success, right? Like if we think about drafting a communication or contract analysis, or things where it is both. I would argue it's lower stakes and it's easier to review the output. I think you can get to value very quickly. If you look at other areas, right, like and I know you've talked about this, but like injury prediction, right? That's an area where I would argue that the effectiveness today is still going to be of questionable return, right? And that's both because of the data and, right? Like if you think about something like injury prediction, I really need to know everything about you, Simon, right? I need to know all of your risk factors, all of your history to do that well, which I really have. But then injuries tend to be, very infrequent in nature, right? And so it's very hard to attack a problem, where hopefully it happens very rarely, right? And so in certain fields, I think that it's still very difficult to achieve the outcomes that people are looking for.
I have heard claims previously with some AI products that they could predict injury with a very high degree of accuracy. And then I think in reality that hasn't happened, which then reduces the confidence in the product and in the AI.
Hallucinations are incredibly risky, right? And even the best models, the hallucination rates have come way down. And some of the specialized models that, do things like information retrieval, it's gotten really good. But in those areas, right, you both have to ensure that the context is there, which it's really hard to connect all the systems to get the context that you need. And then, ultimately you have this challenge of injuries, particularly some injuries, they don't happen that often. And there's a lot of environmental factors in the moment that can contribute to a given industry. So I think, when we look at companies that are out there and approaches, that's a space that we're like, probably not yet.
What do you mean by hallucinations in this context?
I'll give an example yesterday of an issue that we were debugging using AI, right? And we were looking at some athlete data that hadn't mapped to the correct ID. And the model, did a good job of identifying the challenge. It also just created two athletes that didn't exist, right? And so suddenly we're like, wait, these two people don't exist, right? And that's easy for us to see and we quickly catch it. But essentially it's, the models still have an occasional tendency to quite literally hallucinate, right? Create things that didn't exist.
Are the models trained to always come up with an answer? Would they rather do that than say, I don't know?
That's one of the challenges. They're very good at being confidently wrong, right? And so it takes, and I think this is when you hear companies talk about building evals and specialized approaches to deploying these models. A lot of that, right, is trying to condition the input and the output such that you're not getting those hallucinations, so that you're not treading into areas where you can't give factually correct answers. But certainly if you don't have those guardrails in place, there's very few questions that you're going to go put into any of these LLMs where it's not going to attempt to give you an answer.
And I watched the presentation you did at the Human Performance Summit, which was very good. And you were talking about the case study, the NFL Digital Athlete Platform. And that actually was very effective, 17% reduction in concussions, I think 700 fewer injury absences. Was that over the course of one season?
Yes, I believe it was over the course of one season.
How did that project manage to be so effective? And could you tell us a little bit more about it?
I think it succeeded because it was focused on one particular type of injury. I think there was an incredible data set there that the NFL has afforded because of the cameras they have in place, the incredible amount of sensors that they have on their athletes. And it was really, controlled in terms of both the input data and the quality of the analysis, right? And so I think that this is a good example of if you focus on one particular problem, one particular injury with a really robust data set, with a really robust set of findings on the other side, then you can start to say, okay, I think I can see what leads to this type of injury.
So the foundation is the data, the quality of the data to start with.
I was listening to one of your older podcasts with Luke Bourne, one of our colleagues, right? And he talks about, would you take good data or good process? I think ideally you'd take both, right? And I think in their case, it was both great data as well as rigorous process, right? Repeatable methodology looking at that.
When we're talking about injury prediction, do you think then we're going to be able to get better at that over time as the models learn more?
Absolutely. I think particularly for injuries also that happen, frequently, right? I think that we will weird traumatic injuries or one-offs that happen infrequently, I think it's always going to be hard. But I think for injuries that happen frequently, with good data leading into, I absolutely believe that we will be able to get better, and we are getting better, right, at injury prediction for sure.
So the data is crucial. We've established that, and then the human expertise is also crucial. Then in the prompting to start with, and in evaluating the outputs at the end,
and setting up the study, right, and setting up the what factors should we. I do still at least my belief here is that the specialists, right, the doctors, the trainers that have the background, that have the intuition of what signals should we be looking at here will still continue to play a role.
Are there also risks in terms of privacy and security, especially when we're talking about medical records of players, things like that?
That should not be happening, right? Because ultimately the data that you're putting in is being used to train future inference, future responses, right? And it's essentially the way we think about it, the way we coach our employees. If it's something that you would not be comfortable sending to anyone in the outside world, it should not be going in to any of the consumer models. Now, look, I think there are ways to, whether we use models today, but we consume them in a path such that we have agreements in place that we know where the data is being stored. Can it be used to train the public models? And you have to be very careful about that. I think what can make this hard, and one of the stories I often tell is, I assume some of you have multiple Gmail accounts, right? Have you ever, just opened up the window and you're like, oh, I'm logged into my personal account, not my work account, right? And I think unfortunately what makes this tricky is even those with the best intentions, sometimes you make mistakes, right? You're just, I'm in my personal version of Claude, and I accidentally put it there, right? And so I think that there is, you absolutely have to be very careful with where you're putting data, right? And it's not just medical information. This could be, it could be contract information, right? It could be schedules, right? Which you don't think about as oh, it's just a schedule. I want to optimize the schedule. Well, now suddenly I know where athletes are out in the public domain, right? So it runs the gambit in terms of really being deliberate about where am I giving this information and how am I consuming the model. And it's actually somewhat easier through the large providers, right? Because it's clear to see their terms, it's clear to see where you're consuming it from. I think where everyone in the space has to be really careful is you're working with vendors. Do you have a clear picture of what their data retention policies are, of what models they're using, of where are they storing it, what is it being used to train, and so I think being able to ask those questions of anyone that is coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to give you AI functionality is absolutely critical.
These models, they encourage integrations, don't they, a lot of the time? So, for instance, integrating with your Gmail, so they have access to all of your email. And that can be quite appealing if for some of the insights it can gain from that and the filtering.
Done the right way, it can still be safe and secure, right? But you're right. Like if you pull up Claude, it's got a million connections. You can just click, and you're feeding all of that context in. It's a question of like, through what forum are you doing that?
Could any of that ever crop up anywhere else? Does it feed the model generally so that another user might have access to some of that information?
You see people, launching these types of attacks, for lack of a better word, right today, where they go and they try and essentially suss out information that has been shared into the model that should not have been shared. So absolutely, right. And I think that's interesting too. And I give this example of a fake condition, right? That a bunch of security researchers basically they made up this disease. It was a disease of the eye characterized by red, puffy, swelling eyes. And it was completely made up, right? They fabricated papers about it and they sort of feed it in to the large models. Well, what happened? And certainly the models are getting better at this, but the models started to return answers saying that this was a real condition, right? That this bixonomania was something that you could get. And I think it's not just people necessarily using it to go out there and find information that may have leaked. You have to be careful with, have they deliberately put information into the public models to kind of mislead and, lead to questionable answers.
So clubs should be devoting quite a bit of time and resource to the security then, as well as kind of what they could do creatively with these models.
Policies, security, right? Training their employees, being aware of what people are not doing. And certainly as a technology company, we have to do this, right? Like we have to rethink what are the types of things that we have to train our employees on? What are the policies we have to put in place? How do we ensure that, we have restrictions around the models that they're using? It all becomes a new frontier that we have to think about. And look, the reality too is that there are new ways, that you can be hacked, right? That you can be taken advantage of. One example is skills. And I think people think of skills as, it's just a text, it's a markdown file, right? And you tell the model what to do. And so why wouldn't I just go to the internet and plug in a skill? But you have to be careful with that, right? Like you used to think of skills almost as code. And people can use even vectors like that as new ways to get at information in your systems.
For anyone who might not know, could you explain what a skill is?
Yeah, I think a skill, in the simplest terms that I can think of, right, is a set of instructions, repeatable instructions that tells these models a particular set of actions to take or constraints, right? And so let me actually pull up something here just so I can pull an example from my own life. But I have a skill. I have a skill that essentially constructs my my morning brief. Right. So every morning I come in, I've given instructions on the things that I want the model to check, things I want it to ignore, things that people in particular I want it to listen to signal from, and then I run that as an instruction set to the model each morning to give me back my morning brief.
Build or buy is always a big question as well. So I was wondering if you could give any insight into that. So what clubs are actually building themselves in terms of models and the products they are buying in, which will then bring us on to the Teamworks models, I think.
Frankly, it depends on the size of the club, right? Like if larger clubs, obviously, that have their own analytics teams, they're always trying to get that edge. And so they're always experimenting with their own models. They're pulling in data from models like ours and using it to supplement what they have in place. Obviously, if you're a smaller club, with fewer resources, you might be entirely dependent on one of the model providers, right? As sort of your outsourced analytics staff. But I think we see people doing, everything on the model side. We also, an example from the United States, we've seen in the American football world is we see people doing things like building tools for scout bias detection, right? And so they're out there looking at does the evaluation from the scout, the quantitative scores that they provided the player, match the written language that they had in place, right? We're humans, right? We all have bias. and maybe I just like this person. And usually, like, there's ways to start to get at that from the language that you use relative to the quantitative output. So, we see people using this stuff in really, really creative ways that go beyond just, the models we think of, which is like, tell me what player out there is really good.
What if you could know not just who a player is today, but who they will become? That's the edge that Teamwork's Player ID gives clubs in the market that decides transfer windows. It gives proven insights that drive a competitive advantage. Over half of transfers still miss, and analysts are drowning in data they can't fully use. Teamwork's Player ID clears the way to smarter decisions. Built by a powerhouse team of football data scientists and proven across 22 transfer windows, it moves beyond raw stats to genuine projection. Instead of black box recommendations, you get transparent, explainable intelligence. Why a player fits your team, league, and strategy. Before you commit. Ready to win on and off the pitch? Visit teamworks.com/player-ID.
That's fascinating because I know Luke talked a lot about human biases on the podcast that we did. And obviously I've read Daniel Kahneman, the Thinking Fast and Slow, and there are so many human biases, aren't there really? So AI then would be a filter, say, in that context of scout reports.
Yeah. That's one example we see out there of people doing creative things. And I think everything from visualizations to their own data, like, people are doing incredible things with AI today, and I think that's only going to continue to increase as we go forward.
Yeah, we're starting to see the job title of head of AI at clubs. So Laurie Shaw had that title at Man City. Now he's at Liverpool. I think Reading have got a head of AI. Is that a title you're seeing more in US sports now?
I think everything from visualizations to their own data, like, people are doing incredible things with AI today, and I think that's only going to continue to increase as we go forward.
We're starting to see the job title of head of AI at clubs. So Laurie Shaw had that title at Man City. Now he's at Liverpool. I think Reading have got a head of AI. Is that a title you're seeing more in US sports now?
I wouldn't say it's the norm yet, but we are certainly starting to see it pop up more and more.
And they would be looking across the whole of the sporting organization at how they could apply AI into workflows and processes.
Their ultimate focus may not just be on the team performance side, right? It's how can I use AI from everything from, obviously, how do we win more games, to the commercials, right? Like using it to the collegiate space here. Right, I need to go raise money from donors. How can I use AI to enrich the information that I have about my donors and improve my comms to them? So that head of AI may have a mandate that spans just beyond the team side all the way to the commercials as well.
And would you say US sport is ahead of UK football at the moment in this sphere?
Some sports are ahead on different axes, right? I think baseball has certainly been the sport, and I think Luke talks about this too, right, that has embraced analytics the most. You have teams with 30-person teams on the analytics side, and look, it is a sport rooted in analytics, right? You've had people taking box scores and everything for a long time, and so obviously they've just been at it the longest. I think there are other elements like human performance and certain things that European teams are tracking relating to human performance that are frankly ahead of their American counterparts.
Is it going to really open up that world of tracking data? Because now we got this tracking data with millions of data points from a match, every movement of every player and the ball. And clubs, maybe, Luke said this, haven't known how to properly utilize all that data at the moment, but AI will quickly start to open that up, you think?
The problem, even for the last 10 years, hasn't necessarily been data, right? Every club has data now, and force plates and GPS harnesses and cameras tracking your joints down to the centimeter. To your question, it's like, what do I do with that? All right. And I do think that this is exciting now. Some of this has been possible with approaches that predate LLMs, right? A lot of the models now, and I would argue LLMs aren't always the best tool for some of the models and some of the AI that you want to deploy. But I think, I think over the next couple of years, in terms of being able to go look at these huge bodies of data that these organizations have and produce unique insights, I definitely think we're going to see that.
And will we see a lot less of the sort of manual labor now? So I'm thinking like analysts who had to look through hours and hours of match footage of their opponent before a match. And also working on visualizations for a long time, doing those manually. But we're going to be able to save a lot of manpower in those sort of areas, do you think?
Those roles are just going to shift, right? Whereas that person may have spent hours hunting for that video or putting those visualizations together, now you essentially shift their time forward to what I would argue is far more valuable, right? Like if I don't have to go find the relevant clips, if I don't have to go build the visualization, and I can truly spend my time on analyzing it, on looking at it, like that's what's really, I think, exciting, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, how do you give people the information they need to make better decisions faster? And I think that's going to, I don't think we're going to see this huge drop in staff. I think we're just going to be able to see them focus on the work that's ultimately the most impactful.
And I was going to look a bit more at the Teamworks products now. So how is AI incorporated into some of those products? Say like Player ID, for example.
Player ID, I think, goes back to AI that's been happening for a while. And we have, I think of our data products, and I frankly think of our UI and workflow products, and we're using AI in both of them, right? And I'll come back to Player ID last, right? We're using AI in our products in a whole host of ways, right? I would call it the less sexy, but potentially huge time savings, right? And all of the systems that we build, people often have to upload a lot of data, right? Whether it's a survey that they want to send the players, or in our world in the collegiate in the US, right? I need to upload a syllabus for an athlete that has their class schedule and their athlete records, or my inventory, right? I want to upload my inventory into our system. That used to take a lot of time, right? I had to go label it and figure out how to transform it. Not anymore, right? We can use AI and that to say, great, I know everything that's in your inventory. I can map it to a SKU. I can take that survey. I can immediately transform it to something that you can use digitally. I could take that syllabus and I can extract all the dates and assignment types and put it on a calendar for some places like that. I think we can do it. I think, for those that follow this space closely, certainly I think we're starting to see more and more LLMs to query data. And I think the demo that everyone does, right, is they pull up the typical chat interface and they say, show me the player with the highest load, right? And it goes into one of the providers on that side and it spits back a graph that shows the player with the highest load. And I think, that's really exciting, right? Because writing that query, doing those things used to take a lot of time. And I think the evolution we're going to see, over the next months, certainly in the next years, is a little bit of an evolution from what we internally call reactive to proactive, right? So much of that today is, I still need you to go to the system and ask a question. I need you to say, hey, show me the 10 players that are most exciting for this role, or I need you to say, show me that load. I think with the agentic workflows that are coming online, that's going to evolve, right? We can know that the second that a player is injured and start recommending next steps for you, right? And so I think we're going to move from this world of people needing to query the system to the system being able to proactively suggest, recommendations and data that they may want to look like. I still think that the human element there is going to be, critically important. If we look at the player ID side, though, right? I think the problem we're trying to solve there, ultimately, in the world of global football, is how do we help you find the best players in the world? And I think, every club in the world, we talked about this, has data now. I don't think that's the problem. The problem in AI and in metrics on identifying players is that different metrics disagree, right? One is going to say that a player is excellent. Another is going to say his players, he or she, is average. And so what do you believe? I think that's what we're out there trying to solve. And so, instead of picking a favorite metric, we've built several. I think we're going to continue to build more, looking at the game a different way. And then we want to build a system using AI, using different approaches that learns which one to trust and which one to, in a given situation, right? And it's funny, I actually think it's somewhat analogous to the human side, right? Where you have a sporting director who has a room full of scouts, right? And over time, I imagine that sporting director learns, which scout do I trust their recommendation on a striker a little bit more? Who's good at evaluating younger players? Who's good at evaluating center backs, right? And I think that's what we're trying to do on the technology side. And we do that, at least in our world, through something that we call the composite player metric.
Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
For us, I think the way I would frame it is we built a system that has learned from years of results that predate me. I can't take credit for any of this work, right? How much weight to put on the thing that it's looking at, right? And I think the test that we have to pass is not does it describe the last season well, right? It's does this predict what's going to happen next season, right? And that's a much harder bar to clear.
We had a very good presentation actually by Rich Byrne and Alex Hinton about predictive signings, basically telling how good a player will be in the future versus how good they are now.
Which is ultimately the problem we're all trying to solve, right? And it's not just are they going to be good, and this is really hard, right? Not are they going to be good next season? Are they going to be good for, hopefully the next 5 or so, right? That's a really hard, it's a hard problem to solve, but obviously it is a very consequential one.
There's obviously huge value there, isn't there? Because they use the example of Charlie Cresswell, who I think Toulouse had signed for €4 million, and they just sold him, I think, for getting on for €20 million. So huge value in 2 years. Yeah.
Exactly, right. How can we go find those gems, right? I think I'm a huge world football fan, right? I think it's amazing, right? You have these player pipelines of kids and athletes all over the world. And it's like, how do you go identify that player that is going to provide that value, that is the diamond in the rough? And frankly, I think one of the things that's really exciting about this technology and what can be possible, and as we get cameras in more places around the world with higher quality footage, it's going to hopefully provide opportunities to even more and more athletes to be discovered as well.
A big trend that I've seen in the time I've been running Training Ground Guru is clubs trying to become more and more bespoke. So I mean that in a couple of ways. First of all, being very clear on their style of play, so what players they want within that, and different teams will value and prize different types of players, different profiles. Then the other thing is a more individual approach to training, for example. So it used to be that everyone would do the same training sessions, but now I think there is a more individual approach to load, to what work you do in training, to doing small groups, that type of thing. So will AI make all of that individualization and that bespoke nature easier in the future?
Personalization and being able to deliver data that is bespoke to a given playing style, being able to deliver, treatment plans that are bespoke to a given individual. I think that's absolutely there. And I think it's also going to change, frankly, the way software is consumed, right? Like if you play this out to its, ultimate potential extreme, right? There's a world in which the software you start to use on a daily basis is personalized to how you use it, right? It's rebuilding to you. And so I think it's very easy to imagine that will be true too, as we think about training and all the rest. And I think, you could argue like, well, if everyone's just going to have this, all-knowing technology and these predictions, aren't we all just going to be seeing the same thing? I don't think that's going to be the case at all. Right? I think there's still going to be the human element of this, right? Especially in sport, right? At the end of the day, there's 11 players that go on the field that have to do what they do. But I think that people are going to find creative ways to use this that produce personal, unique outcomes for their club, for their culture, and all the rest.
Yeah, because I always think every football club is different, isn't it, in terms of location, the population, the culture of the town. It's different every club, every town.
I think you're right. Personalized more and more.
Talking about that thing of build or buy, if clubs buy in the teamwork solutions, does that take away a lot of the headache about the risks and the security and privacy that we were talking about earlier?
I think certainly for the data, that we deliver, right? I would argue we invest in an enormous amount of time and treasure and ensuring that we keep data secure, that we make sure that we're not giving it to models that are training public things, right? I think, we work with the U.S. military, right? So we deal with data that is incredibly sensitive, that obviously we can't afford to have getting out there. So I think, certainly, at least for the information and the systems they use from us, I want them to sleep better at night knowing that we take that headache off. And I don't think, though, that it then becomes, I don't have to worry about this anymore, right? Because I do think clubs are going to, especially the larger ones, they're going to continue to build their own models. They're going to continue to experiment with AI. And so I think it's not going to be an either or.
What do you think is the future of AI in sport and football in particular? So say we're looking even 3 years in advance, because things are moving so quickly.
I want to believe, and I know some things we have in flight, that we will continue to get better at being able to identify those players, with potential, with talent. I think we'll be able to, so many of the, the models I think that we look at today tend to overfavor offense and the rest. And so how can we start to do even more with off ball and looking at defensive players? I think we'll see more and more there. But I'm excited about a lot, right? Like I think, going back to my time in the youth world, right? Like the cameras tracking kids all over the world now are going to get so incredible, right? We work with a company, Xbox Go, that has a camera that has an AI chip on the camera, right? That is now panning and zooming and tracking kids down to the youngest level. Well, if we're suddenly starting to get footage from every kid playing football around the world, and now we have the means and compute the models to potentially even analyze that. Again, I get really excited about what is that going to mean for being able to identify talent regardless of where you are. I do think, we talked as like workflow is going to change, right? We're going to see that like people don't have to go do the parts of their job that they don't want to do. Like they're going to be cutting film. You're not going to be sitting there in time having to manually annotate things. That is going to evolve. At the end of the day, this is one of the few verticals where that's all great, but there's still, I'll go back to this, there are 11 men or women that on game day have to go on the field and perform. And I don't see them running around with AI chips in their head telling them how to play football.
Do you have any worries or fears that we should mitigate against and be wary of?
I lose a lot of sleep at night, right? I think we all see it. And I think we've talked about data loss and data risk, right? I think, particularly in the world that we all play in, the sophistication of hackers and attackers is going up every day, right? I think there may have been disbelief at first when Claude came out and said, "Hey, do we have this no mythos model? We can't release it because it's really good at finding vulnerabilities." I was like, okay, this is it's all marketing, right? It wasn't, right? And I think we're seeing this, right? We're seeing this in our own code where particularly some of these more advanced models are very good at finding vulnerabilities. On the plus side, it means now we can fix them very quickly. We find things we wouldn't have found. The other side of that, right, is that that's all available to the attackers. And I think that because you think about the amount of time you have to spend thinking about securing your data, securing your infrastructure, right? Like it's going to continue to increase. And so I certainly lose a lot of sleep over, are we doing everything we can to protect the information that we are trusted with? And I think, there's a quote, I think it may have been Warren Buffett. I don't want to get this wrong, so I don't want to say this, but he's saying like, it's the best time to be a scammer, right? I can go synthesize your voice, right? I can go synthesize your likeness. I can synthesize your style. I can use that to launch, these essentially human engineering attacks in a way that was never possible, right? And I think everyone tends to think about securing it at the code level. So many exploits, right, don't happen because of something that went wrong in the code. It happens because we're humans. We're fallible, right? And calls you, they trick you, they get you to do something you shouldn't, right? And the sophistication with which those types of, social engineering attacks can be launched now is scary.
I'm looking forward to meeting you in person next month at our conference when you're going to be delivering one of the first speeches about the state of AI in sports.
I'm very excited to be there. Hopefully I get to show some new flashy things too. But I'm very excited to come over to the UK and get to speak with everyone. And as I said, I'm a huge football fan. I think a lot of people in our company tend to be American football fans. I'm far more biased to world soccer than anything else. And getting to speak at Old Trafford is that's a pretty cool life experience.
Have you given any more thought to the detail of your presentation and what it's going to be about?
Not to ruin everything, I think we more specific, some of the stuff we talked about today around where are we seeing people use AI effectively, and where we may be seeing some of that, I don't want to say horror stories, but some of the areas where it's not going as well. I'm optimistic that by the time I come over to see you, we're going to have some really good data from around the world of sport on how a lot of operators are using AI, right? Where are they on a spend basis? Where are they finding success? I'm hoping I'll be able to share those findings with you. And then, I'm a CTO. The best part of my job is sometimes I get to show off some new shiny toys. And certainly I hope I get to show off some new shiny toys.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Reed.
Thank you very much, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Training Ground Guru podcast. in association with Teamwork's Player ID. We'll be back next month with another episode.